You know, when a massive suspension bridge collapses into a river, we have this very specific, comforting way of investigating the disaster.
Right, we look for the single mechanical failure.
Exactly. We expect the investigators to sift through the wreckage, find that one rusted rivet or, the cracked steel beam, and the lead engineer points at it and says, there it is.
Yeah, it's a highly binary, incredibly soothing way to look at the world. Broken or not broken. I mean, if it's just a bad rivet, we can just replace the rivet and the bridge is safe.
Right. But what happens when you step away from physical engineering and step into the realm of sociology, economics, and human systems? Suddenly, that simple diagnostic framework just completely falls apart.
Oh, totally. Because when a civilization collapses, it rarely happens because of a single bad actor or, an isolated mistake.
We aren't looking at a single rusted rivet anymore.
Exactly. We are looking at a society whose very blueprint was mathematically guaranteed to fail. It fails because the foundational architecture of that society was actively designed to ignore the very warning signals that could have saved it.
It's a society-wide blind spot that the builders installed on purpose. And that is exactly the diagnostic landscape we are exploring today in this deep dive.
It's a fascinating subject.
It really is. We are taking a highly specific structural analysis of an ancient text, Surah 26, known as Ash-Shu'ara, specifically verses 105 to 122. Our guide for this is a foundational socioeconomic analysis, Lecture 9 from the Tolu Islam Digital Audio Archives.
But we should probably set the ground rules right now for you, the listener. We are completely stripping away the layers of traditional religious sentimentality here.
Yeah, absolutely. No theology today.
Right. We are reading this text strictly as a survival manual for a collapsing civilization, which really is the only way to actually understand what the text is doing.
Because if you view this narrative merely as a collection of moral fables or Sunday school theology, you miss the core mechanics.
Exactly. We're looking at this through the lens of pure sociology and systems engineering. We're treating this source material as a master blueprint of how societies build themselves, how they distribute power, and ultimately how they self-destruct.
So let's jump right into the center of the conflict. Our case study revolves around the community of Noah, but we need to forget the storybook imagery of animals walking 2 by 2 onto a wooden boat.
Yeah, throw that out entirely. The source text frames Noah not as a preacher, but as a disruptor, a systems engineer proposing a radical new operating system for his society.
And the elite class of his society, they're referred to as the Mala, they state their objection to his proposed system in verse 26.111 with perfect clarity.
What do they say?
They say, "Numenu laka wataba'aka alartalun," which roughly translates to, shall we believe in you when the lowest of people follow you?
And right here is where we really have to explode the traditional, centuries-old reading of this narrative.
How so?
Well, for a very long time, this objection has been read as a simple story about cultural snobbery. The standard interpretation is that the rich, arrogant elites were just too proud to sit in the same room as the poor, dirty laborers.
Right, like they didn't want the guys in the muddy boots tracking dirt onto their marble floors.
Exactly. But the source material completely upends that interpretation because, honestly, it's insufficiently structural. This is not primarily about social prestige or elitist pride.
Oh, wow. So what is it about?
It is an epistemological claim disguised as a class observation. The Malas are arguing that the social composition of Noah's following is, in and of itself, evidence against the validity of his message.
Okay, let's translate that for a second. When you say epistemological claim, you mean they're making an argument about the nature of truth itself.
Yes, precisely. They are defining what is real and what is false based on who is standing in the room. Let's look at the terrifyingly logical argument they're actually making.
Okay, lay it out.
They are essentially saying, if this new rational argument you're presenting were genuinely sound, the people who have the highest cognitive capacity, the best education, and the most to gain from optimizing society, meaning us, the elite, we would have recognized its soundness.
I see what you're saying. They're looking around and going, we're the smartest guys in the room, we run the economy. If your idea was actually a good idea, we would have bought it already.
Yeah. And the fact that only the dispossessed, the marginalized, the lowest rungs of society are accepting this message means, in the logic of the elite, that this argument isn't an objective truth at all.
Right, to them, it must merely be a manipulative ideology designed to serve the interests of the dispossessed.
Exactly. It's a structural inversion. Truth is defined entirely by who benefits from it.
But hold on, let me play devil's advocate here. If I'm an executive, That argument actually makes a kind of ruthless political sense.
You mean?
Well, if someone comes into my company pitching a mass restructure, and the only people who agree with the pitch are the disgruntled interns, it's not totally crazy for me to say, this isn't a brilliant business strategy, this is just the interns trying to get out of doing grunt work. Why is that such a fatal error?
Because it is a complete structural inversion of reality. They have rigorously rigged the evaluation process. By defining truth entirely by the social capital of the person holding it, they've insulated themselves from objective reality.
So truth, in their system, isn't evaluated by evidence or data.
Right. Truth is defined by the status of the evaluator. If a low-status person claims a bridge is cracking, the claim itself is rendered invalid simply because a low-status person said it.
Think about how often this happens today. I mean, look at modern corporate boardrooms or political spheres.
Oh, constantly.
How often is the validity of a highly disruptive idea judged solely by the platform size or the credentials of the person pitching it?
Yeah, exactly. If a junior supply chain worker points out a fundamental mathematical flaw in a company's revenue model, are they listened to?
Usually not. Their data is dismissed because they don't have C-suite in their title.
Right. By defining truth by social capital, the elite are basically saying, the market has already decided what is true and valuable, and we are the winners of that market. Therefore, we are the sole arbiters of truth.
So reality doesn't matter unless a rich person acknowledges it.
Exactly. And if that's the game the elite are playing, we really need to examine exactly who they are excluding, because the text uses a very specific word for these excluded people, ardlin.
Yeah, and a deeper look at that word reveals exactly why this society is doomed. Let's do a quick linguistic deep dive.
The source text emphasizes that ardlin doesn't just mean poor in a simple, passive economic sense. It carries heavy, systemic connotations of being actively rejected, cast aside, and considered functionally useless to the decision-making process.
The source mentions concepts like the commie in traditional agrarian societies. Let's unpack that, because it paints a very vivid picture.
Yeah, the commies were the marginalized manual laborers, the callers making the shoes, the weavers making the clothes, the sweepers cleaning the streets.
Right, the people who perform the essential extracting labor that the system absolutely relies on to function. The city literally stops working without them.
But they are completely shut out of the social and political architecture. They are the gears in the machine, but they are not considered part of the intelligence of the machine. The system extracts maximum value from them without giving them a seat at the table.
So when the elite look at the Ardhalin listening to Noah, they aren't just seeing poor people. They are seeing human farm equipment.
Exactly. They're saying these people don't even have the cognitive capacity to understand complex socioeconomic systems. How can their endorsement of your new system be taken seriously?
Which makes Noah's response in verse 26.112 structurally brilliant. A modern social justice advocate might respond by getting defensive. They might say, how dare you? These are hardworking, noble people.
Right, playing into the emotional trap. But Noah doesn't defend their moral character at all. Instead, he says, "Wama ilmi bimakanu yamalun," which means, and what knowledge do I have of what they did? Their accounting is only with my Lord.
I love this because he's talking exactly like an engineer. He's laying down a strict boundary condition.
How so?
He's saying, look, my job is to transmit a signal. The signal is the new operating system. I broadcast it. If a specific receiver picks up the signal, I don't care about the brand name or the social history of that receiver. The signal was received.
It is a masterclass in managing variables. He's making a profoundly epistemological point. The messenger's only variable to manage is the clarity and delivery of the message itself. The social history, the economic background of the recipients, that is not the messenger's variable to control. And when he says, Aisabumi Allah, their accounting is with my Lord, he is referring to the absolute rational order of the universe.
Yeah, because in the strict analytical framework we are applying here, the Lord represents that unchangeable mathematical reality. The laws of physics don't care about your bank account.
Exactly. Noah is stating that the rational order does not sort data by social capital. The universe doesn't care if a complex equation is solved by a king or a street sweeper. The math is either correct or it isn't.
But here is the fatal flaw in the elite's logic, and it's the core of the epistemological trap. By saying the Artaloon cannot possibly be right because they are at the bottom, The elite have actually filtered out the most accurate data processors in their entire society.
Yes. Let's walk through the sociology of that. Why are the marginalized actually the most objective evaluators in this scenario?
Well, because they have absolutely zero vested interest in protecting the broken system.
Yeah.
If you are at the top of an exploitative pyramid, you have every incentive to ignore data that says the pyramid is crumbling.
Right. You will lie to yourself. You will hire consultants to tell you the pyramid is fine.
Exactly. But if you are the one being crushed at the bottom of the pyramid, you have the clearest, most unclouded view of the structural stress fractures.
That is an incredibly important systems principle. The poor and dispossessed have the least to lose by evaluating a disruptive truth on its actual merits. The elite have everything to lose.
So, by constructing a society that systematically ignores the voices of the artisan, the elite are mathematically filtering out the exact evaluators who are most likely to process the evidence honestly.
It's corporate suicide on a civilizational scale. Imagine you own a massive manufacturing plant, and the executives in the air-conditioned offices decide that only executives are allowed to report on machine safety. The workers actually operating the machines, the ones literally losing their fingers to faulty gears, are ignored because they lack managerial credentials.
Oh, wow, yeah. The executives haven't just made a moral error. They have systematically suppressed the most accurate feedback loop in their entire operation.
And that suppression is the specific mechanism of their eventual collapse. The rejection of Noah is not just some arbitrary act of stubbornness.
Right, the class objection, using social status to legitimize the rejection of truth, is the actual gear turning behind the scenes that drives this civilization to commit suicide. They blind themselves to reality because reality is being spoken by the wrong demographic.
Okay, that perfectly explains how the elite blocked the message, but I want to push back on why they felt the need to fight so hard.
Go for it.
Because if Noah was just some guy standing in the town square telling people to be nice to each other, the elite wouldn't have cared. They would have just ignored him. Why did they view him as an existential threat?
That brings us to a crucial misconception that our source text absolutely tears apart. There is this deeply ingrained myth that prophets and messengers simply came to preach what is known as universal ethics.
You know, the list: don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat, be a good neighbor, help the poor.
Right, and the historical reality is that universal ethics existed long before these specific civilizational conflicts. You can find the concepts of don't steal and be nice in the ancient texts of Hinduism, in Confucian philosophy, in almost every early human tradition.
The sociological reality is that systems of power do not feel threatened by personal morality. In fact, they often encourage it.
Wait, really? Why would they encourage it?
Because it keeps things stable. If you are a street preacher and you walk up to a pickpocket and tell him, hey, stealing is wrong, you should stop, the thief will likely just ignore you. The elite architecture certainly does not care. They might even applaud you for trying to keep the workforce docile.
Right, personal ethics are safe. But what happens when you look at the economic architecture of a society and you realize the system itself is built on theft?
Exactly. What happens when you point out that extracting labor from the artisan without fair compensation isn't just bad manners, it is institutionalized robbery.
If you try to dismantle that system, the elite will not applaud you. They will threaten you with exile. They will destroy you.
Yes. The elite weren't fighting Noah because he asked them to be polite. They were fighting him because he was attempting to install a completely new operating system that would eradicate their entire model of exploitation.
The Toledi Islam source introduces a brilliant foundational distinction here between religion and deen. And this is vital to understanding the mechanics of civilizational change.
Yeah, let's get into that. Religion, in the traditional safe sense, is compared to isolated pillars standing in a ruin. You have the pillar of prayer, the pillar of fasting, the pillar of charity.
Right. They are individual rituals, isolated acts of personal piety. A person can practice these pillars in a vacuum. You can pray 5 times a day and still participate in an entirely corrupt, exploitative economy.
But deen, which we translate as the system or the way of life, is the roof. It is the architectural structure that rests on those pillars, covers them, and reorganizes the entirety of human society beneath it.
The source text explicitly critiques the modern state of affairs, noting how people will happily observe the pillars of religion because it doesn't threaten the economic status quo.
Severe inequality, class warfare, economic monopolies, All of these can thrive perfectly well in a society where everyone is individually practicing isolated religious rituals. The system doesn't care if you pray, as long as you keep handing over your surplus labor.
It's exactly like a corporate whistleblower.
Yeah.
Imagine you work at a massive corrupt energy company.
Okay.
If you send out a company-wide email saying, hey everyone, let's remember to recycle our soda cans, be mindful of our carbon footprint, and be polite in the break room, HR will probably give you an award. You are preaching universal ethics. You are establishing a pillar.
But if you discover that the company's core business model involves illegally dumping toxic waste into the municipal water supply to save billions of dollars, and you go to the press to dismantle that business model,
You don't get an award. You get fired. You get
Right.
buried in lawsuits. Because you aren't preaching ethics anymore. You are threatening the dean, the economic roof of the corporation.
Noah was a whistleblower on a civilizational scale. He was bringing a comprehensive roof that would replace their exploitative hierarchy with an egalitarian architecture.
And that leads to the most difficult structural question of all. If you are tearing down the old roof, if you are completely dismantling the class structure in social capital, how do you actually organize human beings?
Because humans naturally group together. We are tribal by biology. If we throw out social status, what is the metric for unity?
Historically, as the source text analyzes, human systems have always defaulted to grouping people by biological or geographical accidents. We group by race. We group by lines drawn on a map. We group by bloodlines and caste systems.
The text mentions the brutal realities of this in the Indian subcontinent, the rigid stratification between castes, the Rajputs viewing themselves as inherently superior to the Arains or the Shudras based entirely on genetic lottery.
Right? The idea that a person from a lower caste cannot sit on the same level, cannot eat from the same plate. And even when these societies industrialize, these biological stratifications simply morph into devastating class warfare.
But why do all of those traditional groupings inevitably fail?
Because they are fundamentally arbitrary and inherently oppressive. You cannot build a just, rational system on the foundation of biological accidents. If unity is based on race or bloodline, someone is always inherently categorized as superior, and someone is inherently inferior.
The system is structurally flawed from the blueprint stage. It mathematically guarantees friction and eventual rebellion.
So what is the radical alternative that Noah's system proposes?
Shared ideology. The architecture of unity in this new system is based entirely on a shared commitment to the rational order, ideology over biology.
Okay, let's pause and really look at the mechanics of that, because it sounds great on paper, but the source provides some incredibly stark, uncomfortable historical examples of what this actually looks like in practice.
Yeah, we are talking about the complete severing of biological ties if the ideological ties do not align. The text brings up Noah and his own son.
Right. Noah's son refuses to accept the new ideological system. He aligns himself with the elite's broken architecture. And the verdict of the rational order is absolute. He is not your family. He is structurally a non-son.
And the same with Abraham and his father. Abraham realizes his father is deeply embedded in the corrupt system of idolatry. And again, we need to be clear, this isn't just about bowing to stone statues. Idolatry was the economic system.
The temples were the banks, right?
Exactly. The statues represented the monopolies of the elite. Abraham's father was part of the exploitative machine, and Abraham has to structurally disown him.
It is a profound systemic evaluation. In this new architecture, your genetic code is entirely irrelevant to your societal belonging. A son who does not share the ideological framework of the rational order cannot be part of the same community.
You cannot build a coherent functioning machine if half the gears are operating on a completely different set of physical laws. If you do not share the same ideological operating system, you cannot be part of the same nation.
But wait, let me push back hard on this.
Yeah.
In an ancient agrarian society, your bloodline is your social security. Your family tribe is your physical protection, your economic safety net.
Sure.
If you disown your father or your son over ideology, you are essentially committing economic suicide. How does society actually enforce this without just collapsing into chaos?
That is the exact friction point, and it's why the new system must immediately provide an alternative economic reality. You can only sever biological ties if the ideological community, the new dean, steps in to provide the protection and economic support that the biological tribe used to provide.
It eradicates nationalism, racism, and caste, but it replaces them with a hyper-bonded ideological state.
Yes. If a stranger from across the world supports the architecture of equity, that stranger is your brother, and your biological brother who supports exploitation is a stranger. But that new brotherhood must have an economic engine, or it starves.
Which brings us to the most critical part of this entire deep dive. Economics, wealth distribution, wages. How does this ideological system solve the ultimate driver of almost all class warfare throughout human history?
This is where the Tallud-i-Islam text makes one of its most intellectually rigorous moves. It directly engages with the theories of Karl Marx.
And just to be clear for you listening, we're impartially reporting the sources analysis here. We aren't taking political sides.
That's because, objectively speaking, Marx also recognized the devastating nature of class struggle. Marx also realized that the elite extracted labor from the marginalized. And Marx also proposed an ideological system to solve it: communism.
Right, the famous Marxist maxim, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. On the surface, that sounds exactly like what we were talking about.
A system designed to eradicate the mala, the elite, and elevate the ardharun, the workers, based purely on human need rather than capital ownership.
But the source outlines exactly why the Marxist architecture ultimately failed. And it is a brilliant critique of systems engineering. Marx's formula requires a governing body to determine two highly subjective things: a person's true ability to work and a person's true need for resources.
Which sounds simple enough until you try to actually do the math for millions of people.
Exactly, because Marx had no absolute external anchor for his system. If the system is entirely material and human constructed, who gets to decide what constitutes a need? Who gets to decide the value of a specific type of labor?
It requires a group of human beings, a bureaucracy, a vanguard party, to make those calculations.
And the moment you have human beings deciding who gets what based on their own internal algorithms, you haven't destroyed the elite, you've just created a new one. The bureaucrats become the new mala.
Precisely. Without an incorruptible external standard, an absolute anchor outside of human bias determining wages, or ijara, based on need, becomes impossible to execute fairly. It inevitably devolves into a new form of tyranny.
Because the human administrators will naturally prioritize their own needs or the needs of their political allies, since there is no higher law holding them accountable.
So how does Noah's operating system solve the Karl Marx problem? We look at verse 26.109. Noah makes this massive economic declaration to the elite.
What does he declare?
He says, "Wama salukum alayhi min ajr in ajriya illa alabi allamin," meaning, I ask no reward of you. My reward is only with the Lord of the worlds.
Let's break down the systemic solution embedded in that statement. A messenger, or the leader of this new structural paradigm, is declaring that he is not an employee of the existing social architecture. He cannot be bought.
Because if the elite pay his salary, they own his message. If the billionaire class funds the revolution will mysteriously decide not to tax the billionaires.
Yeah. If his ajr, his wage, comes from the people he's trying to reform, he is inherently compromised. The system he is establishing must distribute resources based on actual human need.
And that can only happen without corruption if the standard for that distribution is anchored in an absolute external source, the rational order. The auditor cannot be bribed because the auditor's paycheck comes from outside the system.
And this isn't just theoretical philosophy. The source provides a concrete historical case study of how this external anchor completely alters economic distribution in the real world. It brings up the example of Abu Bakr, the first caliph, managing the central treasury of the early Islamic State.
This is where we see the ideal actually functioning, because it was anchored correctly.
Let's look at the mechanics of this story. You have two soldiers. They both fight in the same battle. They both take the exact same physical risks. They output the exact same amount of labor and effort on the battlefield. One soldier is a bachelor. The other soldier is married with children.
Under a strictly capitalist or transactional system, they provided the exact same labor, so they get the exact same wage. It's a simple exchange of output for capital.
Right. Or under a corrupted bureaucratic system, maybe the one who is politically connected to the general gets more. But what did Abu Bakr do when managing the state treasury?
He gave a larger share of the wealth to the married soldier with children, even though the battlefield output was identical.
And we must ask, why was that considered structurally sound? Why didn't the bachelor riot? Why didn't the army mutiny over unequal pay for equal work?
Because the evaluation of ajr, of the wage, was not based on a transactional exchange of labor for capital. It was based on need. The married man has a higher structural need to maintain his family unit.
And that evaluation was grounded in a divine absolute, a system everyone had ideologically opted into. They trusted the distribution because the anchor was incorruptible. The math was executed by a system anchored to objective justice, not human greed.
Okay, I love that concept, but I have to play the skeptic again. An architecture that radically redistributes resources based on need requires a massive administration to actually move those resources.
Yeah, you need logistics, you need managers, you need enforcement.
How is this governed without the leader just deciding he speaks for God and becoming an absolute dictator? Because historically, a guy saying, my payroll is handled by the universe, so do what I say, is a recipe for a cult.
That is the exact friction point that leads us to the concept of the Merkaz Imalat, the central authority. In verse 26.110, Noah issues a direct command, Fataku Allaha wayuni, which translates to protect the laws of God and obey me.
Right. Obey me. That phrase is where so many historical systems have derailed into tyranny.
It is crucial to redefine obedience here, based on the text's structural analysis. When Noah says, obey me, he is not making a demand for personal dictatorial power. He is not saying, I'm your king, bow to my personal whims.
Which is how almost every corrupt political entity has twisted this concept. I speak for the divine, therefore my every random thought is an absolute command.
But you cannot obey an abstract law floating in the ether. A law, no matter how perfect or divine, cannot enforce itself. It requires a physical mechanism. Noah is announcing the establishment of a central authority.
It's exactly like traffic laws. The concept of stopping at a red light so people don't die in intersections is a brilliant, life-saving abstract rule, but you can't just throw that abstract concept out into the world and hope drivers figure it out.
Exactly. You have to build the actual physical traffic light. You need a centralized grid that times the lights. You need an administration that paves the roads.
When the traffic light turns red, it is effectively saying, obey me. But you aren't obeying the piece of plastic and glass because it has a God complex. You are obeying it because it is the localized physical mechanism executing the universal law of traffic safety.
That is the perfect analogy. Noah is establishing himself as the initial localized mechanism. He is the first node in the central authority. But, as the source points out, this authority is not meant to be a permanent one-man dictatorship.
Right. The original intent was to create a coordinated consultative administration based on Shura, or mutual consultation.
It's the roof we talked about earlier, the administrative roof that makes the system of equity a physical reality. Without the roof, the pillars of personal ethics just stand in the rain and eventually crumble.
And the distinction between this and tyranny is razor thin but absolute. The authority only exists to execute the laws of the rational order. The very second the central authority begins executing its own personal desires or hoarding wealth, it ceases to be the Markazi Malat and becomes just another corrupt Mallah. It becomes the very elite it was designed to replace.
So let's look at the board. Noah has presented the complete package to his society. He has identified the flaw in their epistemological system. They define truth by wealth.
Yep. He has proposed a new architecture based on shared ideology rather than blood or caste.
He has solved the economic wage issue by anchoring it to an external absolute. And he has proposed a consultative central authority to manage it fairly. It is a perfectly rational, structurally sound blueprint for civilizational survival.
And how do the elite respond to this flawless diagnostic report?
They completely block it. They don't just politely decline, they aggressively try to shut the entire system down. Noah makes his final push in verses 26.113 and 114.
He basically says, I am not going to drive away the marginalized believers just to satisfy your arrogance. I am nothing but a clear warner. He is presenting the data. He is showing them the structural stress fractures in their society.
But they refuse to engage with the data. They have captured every internal feedback loop. If a marginalized person speaks up, they are silenced.
If a rational argument is made, it is dismissed because of the social status of the person making it. The system is entirely aggressively closed to self-correction.
And this leads to the point of no return. Verses 26.117 and 118, Noah says, My Lord, my community has rejected me, so iftah between me and them.
We need to focus intensely on that specific word iftah. Traditionally, it translates to open or decide, but in the context of systems engineering, it is a devastatingly precise request. It is a demand for a structural verdict.
It's not a guy in the desert crying and asking for magic lightning to strike his political enemies.
Not at all. It is the breaking point in every civilizational narrative. Noah is acting as a master diagnostician. He realizes that the elite have welded shut every single internal channel for evaluation and course correction.
The societal machine is redlining, the engine is smoking, but the operators have deliberately smashed all the warning gauges.
So Noah is appealing to the operating principle of the universe itself. He's saying, since human social architecture has refused to render a verdict, let the external structural consequences render the verdict.
Exactly. It is pure physics. If you build a suspension bridge and you ignore all the mathematical warnings about the structural load and you fire the safety inspectors because they don't have enough social capital, eventually gravity is going to render a verdict.
You don't need a magical curse for the bridge to fall. You just need the laws of physics to operate exactly as they always do.
This is what the Tulu Islam source calls the law of requital. Mukafat-i-amal.
Yes. The law of requital is not about an angry deity throwing a tantrum. It is the predictable mathematical consequence of accumulated dysfunction. Let's trace the causality here because the source text lays it out perfectly.
Step 1. The community had continuous access to the corrective signal. The messenger was there. The logic was clear.
Step 2. They systematically refused to process the signal, not because they lacked the intelligence to understand it, but because it threatened their economic extraction model.
Step 3. They maintained their broken architecture by actively blocking the evaluation process. They used the epistemological trap, the Ardaloon are following you, therefore your message is invalid, to legally justify filtering out the truth.
And step 4 is the inevitable result. Catastrophic systemic failure. The flood.
The flood is the physical manifestation of the law of requital. When a system accumulates uncorrected dysfunction over a long enough timeline, and all relief valves are welded shut by the elite, the system doesn't just experience a slow, graceful decline.
It fails spectacularly. It collapses under the weight of its own unacknowledged reality.
Because you cannot cheat the rational order indefinitely. You can manipulate public opinion, you can suppress the marginalized laborers, you can rig the economic algorithms to favor the rich, but eventually reality demands its accounting. The structural debt comes due.
This brings us to the ultimate synthesis of the entire deep dive, connecting this architectural breakdown to the final fate of this community. The source text makes a brilliant synthesizing connection here between Lecture 8 and Lecture 9 of its audio series.
Right. Lecture 8 established the basic diagnostic thesis that they rejected the messengers as a structural choice to opt out of the feedback loop.
But what Lecture 9, what we've discussed today, reveals is the actual mechanism of that rejection.
The mechanism was the class objection. The Mala using their social status to legitimize their rejection of the truth. By defining the credibility of a truth by the social capital of the person accepting it, they built an epistemological fortress that was specifically designed to repel any message that could save them.
And there is a repeating refrain throughout this surah after the story of Noah and the flood concludes. It says, "And that is a sign, but most of them were not mu'minin."
We must carefully define mu'minin within this analytical framework. It does not mean people who possess a warm, sentimental feeling of faith.
In this context, mu'minin are those who engage with the evidence. They are the objective data processors. They are the ones who look at reality clearly, independent of their own vested economic interests.
Most of them were not mu'minin. They refused to process the data.
But here is the critical final sociological verdict. The elite were not mentally or biologically incapable of engaging with the evidence. They weren't foolish.
No, they had consciously constructed a social architecture that made engagement with the evidence structurally impossible for anyone who had social capital to lose.
If engaging with the truth means you lose your wealth, your status, your seat at the elite table, and your entire identity, the architecture of your society has essentially guaranteed that you will choose ignorance.
Therefore, the statement, "most of them did not engage," is not merely a lament about the personal or moral failures of individual people. It is a statement of a structural outcome. It is the inevitable mathematical result of the flawed system they built.
If you build a machine designed to ignore truth, you cannot be surprised when it produces catastrophic ignorance.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started with what looked like a simple story of rich people being arrogant toward poor people, and we uncovered a masterclass in civilizational systems engineering.
We saw how the elite deploy an epistemological trap, discounting the most reliable feedback from the marginalized because it threatens the status quo.
We look at the difference between preaching isolated personal ethics, which the system ignores, and introducing a comprehensive revolutionary operating system, the Deen, which the system fights to the death.
We analyzed the absolute necessity of shared ideology over biological accidents like race or caste.
And how a truly equitable economic system requires an incorruptible external anchor for its wages, managed by a consultative central authority, a markaz imalat, that acts like a traffic light rather than a dictator.
And finally, we saw how the refusal to process internal warnings mathematically guarantees an external catastrophic collapse under the law of requital, the structural verdict, iftah.
Which leaves us with one final, deeply uncomfortable thought to mull over. We spent this entire time dissecting an ancient text, analyzing the community of Noah and their mullah, their elite class. But let's bring that diagnostic lens right into our present moment.
Into our own modern architecture.
Exactly. I want you to look at our modern institutions. Look at our global corporations, our political discourse, our media ecosystems. In these spaces, truth is still overwhelmingly evaluated by the social capital, the wealth, and the platform size of the person speaking.
The person with the largest microphone or the biggest bank account is deemed the most correct.
While the frontline workers, the marginalized, the people experiencing the actual friction and failure of the system, are routinely ignored because they lack credentials or status.
We are still filtering out the artisan.
So ask yourself, if our global architecture is still operating on the exact same flawed epistemological loop, what catastrophic systemic failures are we currently accumulating simply because we have structurally filtered out the people most capable of telling us the truth? We might be waiting for the structural verdict without even realizing the internal alarms have already been silenced. The structural debt always comes due. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.